let's talk about public transport. And while we're at it, let's talk about cargo transport as well, because both of those things in Cities Skylines 2 feel like such a natural evolution of what we know from the first game. I think they're going to blow you away. They are going to blow minds, because they certainly had my mind explode with possibilities and options and depth and just all that you can do with it. It's kind of wild. We're going to take a look at all of that today. So let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to start with the feature highlight, and then we're going into the developer insight. Let's get to it.
Transport networks set the rhythm of life in your city. As they move people and cargo, they can create harmony and discord.
Now, if I were a lesser man, I would take the mention of Discord in the feature highlights video as an opportunity to plug that tunnel is fully rendered, which isn't a thing in Cities Skylines 1, but that is a fully rendered tunnel, which to me means that proper little city tours, first-person city tours, can now be done without the need for modded tunnels where you could have them fully rendered. That's kind of cool. That's a nice little detail. It wasn't pointed out. I'm sure everybody's seen it, but it's kind of cool.
This finely tuned orchestra of ships, vehicles, planes, and trains is yours to conduct. To create a thriving metropolis, maintain a steady beat to keep your city in motion. You build a city from scratch in Cities Skylines 2. No public transport, no tracks, no runways. Creating these and other transportation networks is a crucial first step. After that, improving and integrating them paves the way for expansion. When you establish your city, citizens can take the bus or a taxi to get where they're going. These are the first transport options you'll unlock. They're reliable, cheap, and easy to route here, there, and everywhere. Traffic conditions are their Achilles heel.
Something worth pointing out about bus stops in Cities Skylines 2 is that they do behave a little bit differently to Cities Skylines 1. What you might notice is that whenever you place a bus stop or shelter, it does the usual little cutaway in the road for your buses to pull into. But you can now place multiple shelters and stops along that little cutaway, that little lay-by parking spot, whatever you want to call it. I don't know the exact name for it, like the bus part, the part the bus pulls into. And in doing that, you're no longer saying that my bus line goes to this segment of road. You have your bus lines go to the actual stop now. So you can have multiple sections for multiple buses on multiple bus lines to stop at the same time on the same section of road, because they're not all sharing the one little point anymore. That's a little bit of micromanagement I wasn't expecting, but I do really appreciate that. It's also worth pointing out that bus depots handle both combustion engine and electric buses now. You don't need a biofuel depot. You don't need a separate depot for those different types of buses. And on the point of taxis, they actually exist already without the need for a taxi depot, but you can go and use taxi stands to sort of guide them towards busier areas of the city. And you actually need to upgrade your taxi depot with a dispatch sensor to have your taxis go and pick people up from anywhere but a taxi stand. So that's actually a really worthwhile upgrade on a taxi depot. It makes them so much more readily available for your consumers, your tourists, for anybody looking to get from point A to point E. Point E? Sure, from point A to point E directly.
It's no big deal in a new metropolis, but it is for a growing city. That's when you'll level up your public transport. Think trains, trams, and subways. Each one has pros and cons. They're all expensive to build and complicated, requiring depots, tracks, and stops where passengers can buy tickets and get on and off. That means they can't offer the far-reaching service of a bus line or the door-to-door service of a taxi.
Now, we're still on the topic of buses and taxis, but I want to just take a second to point out how good all of the vehicles look. Obviously, Cities Skylines 1 is almost 9 years old, and that's fine. It is a product of its time, and city builders typically aren't known for their spectacular graphics. I think anyone that's kind of complaining about the graphics in Cities Skylines 2 is missing the point, to be brutally honest. Like, it's a good-looking game. I don't care what anybody says. It is a good-looking game. It's not going to look like Starfield. It's not going to look like Baldur's Gate. It's not going to look like Cyberpunk. It's a city builder. It's not a immersive single player RPG, and it's not going to look like one. But the vehicles just look good. I mean, their textures, the reflections, the physics and how they weave and roll. I've talked about that before. I just really appreciate how the game in general looks. It looks fantastic.
On the other hand, they're more efficient, not least because they carry more people and cargo and reduce road congestion. Let's start with subways. They're fast, high capacity, and they take up very little room when they're underground. If they operate above ground, you can run them on elevated tracks so they don't get tangled up with road traffic.
Above ground subways, I think, are something that people are probably taking for granted a little bit these days. I think some people might forget that they weren't a thing when City Skylines came out, and they were added to the game much later on. So having subways able to go above and below ground in base game City Skylines 2 is actually kind of a big deal, and it's going to make it so much easier to just have those networks that do the things you want them to do. If you've seen me play the game before, then you know I like to be able to see my public transportation networks. Obviously, the current series we have on the channel is not necessarily doing that with subways, but I do like to see my public transport. I like to see them moving around, and so I like the option to have my subways above ground where possible.
Trams. They're more flexible than trains, so you can more easily add lines to service new and expanded neighborhoods. Build tram tracks on existing roads, or run them on dedicated tracks if that's the best way to keep the hustle and bustle dialed up.
Now, when it comes to trams, I'll be honest, I've never really nailed the layout on trams. I'm not particularly good with trams, but this is an opportunity to mention something that was discussed in both, I think, the road tools and traffic AI videos, in that it is super easy to add something like tram tracks to existing roads. It's similar to Cities 1 in the sense that you can just click and sort of upgrade the road, but it's just a more straightforward process in City Skylines 2 because of just all of the things that you can add to roads in this game.
Trains carry loads of people too, and not just suburbanites. They can bring visitors from outside your city in large numbers. Trains play another critical role as cargo transport. Build a cargo train terminal, and you build a hub where businesses can receive, ship, and store incoming and outgoing goods.
Now, once again, we're going to be looking back towards the traffic AI video to talk about trains just a little bit, because you do, as was just said, manually connect your trains to the greater region, allowing for the flow of passengers to and from other cities. This is also something that I discovered in my gameplay video recently, which, by the way, a little bit of news for you on the gameplay front. I've seen a couple of comments asking when the next one is. September 27th, 2023. Mark it in your calendars. We're going back to Linden City for our second City Skylines 2 gameplay video. Now, enough about that. I've plugged way too much in this video already. I do want to talk about these cargo train hubs because they just sound fantastic. They sound like they've been expanded from Cities Skylines 1 in that they do similarly allow you to both import and export commercial goods, but they also seem to act as warehouses for goods storage. And I like that. I like that they serve that double purpose. It makes sense that they would serve that double purpose. And it makes sense that, much like everything else in this game, you need to set up the lines yourself. It gives you an extra level of control that wasn't there previously. And that is actually kind of huge. And that is something we'll talk about here in just a minute or two. Although something that's not immediately obvious so far, just as an aside, I did mention this earlier about the taxi depot, but all of these buildings are modular. It's something I pointed out in my gameplay video as well, but for those of you that haven't seen that, you can add things like a maintenance shed to your train depot. You can add extra platforms to a passenger train station. You can add an extra garage to something like a taxi depot to get more vehicles. It is, admittedly, kind of similar to how SimCity 2013 did things, but again, as we've said so many times, I feel like a broken record at this point. I have no problem with that. SimCity 2013 came out over 10 years ago. It's about time people went to that and said, what did they do right? How can we do that better? And that is what City Skylines 2 is doing, in my humble opinion.
Water transportation is another option for passenger travel and moving cargo. It's another high-capacity network, though water transport's real potential lies in imports and exports. You see, cargo ships might be slower than trains, but these bad boys can carry 1,000 tons of stuff to and from your city. Yeah, that's right. You can trade with other cities. So you'll need somewhere to house all the goods and resources coming and going. Easy. Like cargo train terminals, cargo harbors double as cargo storage facilities.
I'm going to be honest, I haven't actually played around with cargo ships yet, but I love the idea of having more control over them and being incentivized to use them more where possible. It feels like that's almost been a theme with everything we've seen so far with Cities Skylines 2. It's taking underutilized systems from Cities Skylines 1 and saying, hey, let's take this, let's make it bigger, let's make it better, let's make it cool, and let's give you a reason to want to use this. The last thing we talked about that was similar was road maintenance. It's no longer an optional extra. It is something you have to be concerned with. And I like the idea that cargo ships, whilst maybe not as essential as road maintenance, I like the idea that they're something that you are going to be encouraged to use because they have got some considerable benefits over something like trains or, as we're about to see, planes.
Like all of the other networks, air transportation has drawbacks. Planes carry fewer passengers and less cargo than ships and trains. Airports are also astronomically expensive and have the footprint of a small town.
So that point about the international airport is true. That is not an exaggeration in the slightest. It genuinely takes up around, if not more than the space of the town that I built in my gameplay video. It is absolutely enormous, as it should be, admittedly. The whole game is playing with scale that is above and beyond what was in Cities Skylines 1. So yeah, the international airport and a lot of things in this game are kind of huge.
However, air transport has a pretty irresistible advantage: speed. Plus, planes won't add to road congestion, they don't follow a rigid track, and they make outside connections incredibly easy.
Now, as large as international airports are, and airports in general happen to be, the sense of scale in Cities Skylines 2 might actually warrant using multiple smaller airports. Contextually speaking, they are still absolutely huge, just in and around, not specifically your city, because you don't necessarily want to say, hey, you can fly from, the northeast corner to the southwest corner, but let's say you get the entire region and you have like a little town up there, a city in the middle, a little town down there. You could have, theoretically, some smaller airports and have people fly from one town to the other, land in the city, all that good stuff. So that is an interesting option. And that really does play into the fact that you are dealing with a much larger space in Cities Skylines 2, at least in sense of scale, than in Cities Skylines 1.
The transport mix in your city will become complex and intricate. Use the transportation overview to review passenger and cargo transportation networks separately. Filter again by transport type to see high-level details about individual lines and toggle them on or off. Use the transportation info view to understand the impact of your networks.
All right, so I said earlier that we were going to talk about cargo networks just a little bit. This is that time. This is something that, and honestly, I have seen people talking about this quite a bit. This is something that I think a lot of people have been paying attention to because this is genuinely a game changer. And that is such a clickbait way of describing things these days. Oh my God, this changes everything. It's a game changer, blah, 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 blah. This is actually a game changer because it does genuinely change how you would play Cities Skylines. Cities Skylines 1 had passenger transit networks, and that was cool. But now Cities Skylines 2 is introducing cargo transport networks, and this isn't even something that's strictly common in city builders. This is something that, with the right amount of depth, is going to be much more similar to something like Transport Fever or Open Transport Tycoon or something like that. It's going to be more similar to those types of games where you're setting up production chains. And that's huge. That is a level of management I wasn't expecting from Cities Skylines 2. And that has me really excited because I love games like Transport Fever. I love the idea that Cities Skylines 2 is taking all these things, throwing them into a pot, adding some nice stock to it, stirring it up, and, making a delicious broth out of it. I'm hungry again. I'm recording while hungry again. I need to stop doing this.
Plan and manage transportation networks carefully to find the right tempo for the movement of people and cargo. Conduct it perfectly, and every citizen, trader, and tourist will march your city toward greatness.
And so once again, we come to the end of the feature highlights video, and we will be getting into the developer insights in just a moment. But I do want to talk about everything that we just saw, because frankly, public transport and cargo transport in Cities Skylines 2 is ridiculously exciting. And that out of context, if you weren't aware of what we're talking about, if you don't know about Cities Skylines 2, it sounds really lame. It does. It sounds a little bit lame. I know people are into this stuff anyway. I'd be lying if I said I didn't watch like Wendover Productions all the time talking about how, you know, all this different industry stuff works. So when I say it's lame, I say that from the heart as someone that enjoys, you know, public transportation networks and documentaries and stuff like that outside of Cities Skylines 2. But it is exciting. It's new. It's taken everything that we know and it has made it bigger and better and bolder. It's given it more depth. It's no longer, you know, a very surface level thing of bus goes from A to E. It is now, it's just got so much going on. Buses have waypoints as well. That is something that I think will be talked about in the developer insights video, but that's something I've been requesting in Cities Skylines for years. And it's now a thing. That is also something that was in Transport Fever 1 and 2. So there's a lot going on here. And honestly, looking at all of it, I think Cities Skylines 2 is going to come together to be one of the most, I don't want to say the best. I don't want to say it's going to be the best city builder of all time, because everyone's going to have different opinions on that. But I think it's going to be one of the most in-depth, and it's going to give you so many different ways to do what you want to do. And that's what's exciting about it. It has this level of accessibility where if you're coming into this not knowing what you're doing, there are systems in place that will help guide you towards what you want to do, and you can learn over time to do things. But if you're coming in here as someone that is intimately familiar with the first game and with other city builders and with games sort of outside of that genre like Transport Fever, you're going to be looking at this and going, wow, this has a lot going on, and I am weirdly familiar with all of it, and I'm excited to see how all of those things combine to create something really special.
Public and cargo transportation are as important in Cities Skylines 2 as they were in Cities Skylines 1. First, you create the depots. Then you set up the stations or the stops. And then you create the lines with the line tool.
Now, something that doesn't get mentioned in either the feature highlights section or the developer insights video here is the difference between the two icons that are on screen for both the bus stops and the taxi stops. The first one, with just the vehicle, is literally just a stop sign. The second one is a stop shelter. The difference between those is obviously going to be the price, but it's also the comfort that comes from using one versus the other. The stop sign has less comfort, the stop shelter has more, and that's just because the elements, weather, you know, I much prefer a bus shelter over just a bus stop sign, because if it's raining, look, man, I walked to and from school a lot. It was miserable, but I'll tell you something. If you're walking in the rain, it's a much better experience than stood waiting for a bus for 15 minutes in the rain. It is, I mean, it's both miserable, but one is considerably worse. So having a shelter is definitely better, and that's what that is. That's what those icons are.
All of the land-based public and cargo transportation types need depots to function. The depots send out the vehicles, and they also have upgrades that improve their functionality.
You can upgrade your bus depot to service electric buses.
Increased capacity for rail yards and dispatch center for taxi depot.
So obviously we have already touched on the idea of being able to expand your buildings. That is something that was possible in SimCity 2013 as well. Not quite to this extent, but it is going to be familiar to those of you that have played that game. Again, as I've said many a time, and I will probably say many times more, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think lifting ideas from other games from 10 years ago is perfectly valid, and I think making them better is perfectly valid as well. And I'm going to try and stop the comparisons between the two games because really they are surface level at best. Now, what's interesting about things like the bus depot and also the taxi depot as well is that the upgrade for electric vehicles is just that. It is an upgrade. It's not something you have by default. And it is going to cost you a certain amount of money. It's going to have a certain amount of monthly upkeep as well. And the same can be said for things like the extra garages that you might want to build around something like a bus depot or taxi depot. And you can build several of them. The garage is going to give you, an extra set of vehicles. It's going to have a monthly upkeep as well. It has pollution stats to it as well. And like I said, you can build several of them. So let's say a garage gives you 5 extra vehicles, build 5 of them, and you've suddenly got 25 extra vehicles. The downside, of course, being that it takes up space, it extends the footprint of the depot itself, and so it might not be a bad idea to move something like your bus depot or taxi depot to an area with a bit more space, because building it downtown means that you might have to get rid of a lot of your downtown buildings just to expand it.
Also, many of the different transportation modes can be connected by you to the outside connections to create the lines that you want.
You can now make your own intercity bus lines.
I've said it before, I will probably say it again. I absolutely love and adore the fact that you do have this level of control over your cities. I love that you can determine where the bus lines go in terms of being intercity. I love that they're not necessarily going to be a thing by default. I especially love that when it comes to trains, because it could sometimes be a little bit weird and a little bit frustrating when you would build a train station connected to the region and then suddenly, your city is being overwhelmed by traffic coming out of that train station. So having that level of control, being able to say that there's this many trains on that line, being able to just not have the line in the first place is good. It's more micromanagement. It's a good thing. It gives you more control. It makes things just that bit more interesting. And that's another theme that I'm noticing with City Skylines 2, is it's all about giving you as much control over your city as is possible. And I'm not going to complain about that.
The trams are included in the base game.
Cargo ships can carry a lot of cargo. They are slow, they completely skip traffic jams, but once they get to harbor and unload their cargo, they can cause a lot of traffic as the trucks pick up the cargo and transport it all over the city.
In Cities 2, you can draw cargo lines between stops and outside connections. You are able to adjust the number of vehicles as well as the operating hours.
And once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I think this is also a good thing. Being able to have that level of control with your cargo lines is equally as important as having that control with your passenger lines. Think about it. How many times do you place something like a cargo train station or a cargo shipping harbor, and it's just swarmed with traffic coming in and out of the place? This is, once again, going to give you a level of control that you didn't have in Cities Skylines 1 to just tweak things, test things, and get things exactly the way you want them to be, to let you customize your city and have it perform and flow the way you want it to.
With the buses, you can create intricate lines that skip traffic jams and busy intersections. They no longer need to go directly from stop to stop.
And for a third time, I'm going to be slightly repeating myself, but that's okay because this is actually a big deal. Bus waypoints are a thing. You don't need to have your buses only route towards essentially bus stops and bus shelters. You can say that I want my bus to go from this stop to this waypoint and then to the next stop, which is essentially going to allow you to skip traffic. It means that if you have a stop on a main road, you can then tell the bus to take the back roads to get to the next stop, as opposed to saying, hey, just sit in all that traffic and hope for the best, which is absolutely fantastic. That's a level of control that's been available in games like Transport Fever. That is something I have been saying for years upon years that Cities Skylines absolutely needs, and I am so pleased that it's going to be a thing in Cities Skylines 2.
Citizens care about cost. You can adjust the ticket price per line. If you make the cost too high, they might not ride your public transportation.
Buses and taxis are unlocked with milestone progression, but every other transportation type you can unlock by using the development points.
So development points are something I've seen a few people be a little bit cautious about, a little bit worried about even, and from my experience playing Cities Skylines 2 and from watching these developer insights and feature highlight videos, the development points are actually a really fun and intuitive system, and it gives you, I'm going to say control again, but it gives you a different type of control over your city. It lets you sort of determine how your city is going to grow, what you're going to focus on. It's less about, hey, I've hit this milestone, therefore I'm going to unlock this thing, and more so, hey, I've hit this milestone, let me see what I want. It's not just saying, hey, you've got trains now, you've got trams now, you've got airports now, you've got subways. It's you need to progress. So you start with trains, and then that can branch out into trams, and then trams go towards a subway. So you kind of build up towards something like that, as you can see on screen at the moment. Trains also eventually lead towards something like an international airport, which admittedly, you're going to need to unlock a few other things in order to get that. You're going to need to get yourself the airport, but that's totally fine. It's, you know, trains and air for an international airport. It is air exclusively to get down towards the space center as well, but they take things like 8 development points, and you don't get that many development points per milestone. So sometimes you're going to be saving up for that thing that you really want. And I just like that. I like that you have that choice. I like it from a creative point of view. I like it from a management point of view. What do I want to focus on? What does my city need? Do we have the capital to get it? How do we get the capital to get the thing that I want?
The new international airport is huge. It's the size of a small town. Oh!
That was great. That was great. You got all the words down?
Yes, but I was so sad. Like, it's the size of a small town. I can't, I'm so nervous. So they will see it. They will see through me.
Can I just say that I love that they're having fun with these developer insights videos. I love that it's not just like someone stood in front of, like, you know, a backdrop of their entire office, kind of like the Bethesda ones, to be honest. Yeah, like the Bethesda Dev Diary things that they do from time to time, they're cool, but I like that these ones are a lot more feature forward, and they're like, hey, here's like a blooper that was kind of funny. I'm just enjoying that about these videos. They have a bit of character to them, right? You're getting a sense of like the people behind Cities Skylines 2, as opposed to Todd Howard standing there and lying to me softly for 15 minutes. It's really refreshing, and it's really fun. And just to reiterate, the airports in general are quite large. There was a shot of the smaller of the airports in that video just there. The airports are ridiculously huge. They are definitely not something you're going to be going for super early on, but they are something exciting to work towards. And I'm excited to work towards them because I haven't done it yet.
The game also features a line overview panel where you can inspect all your public and cargo lines. You can also access each line through the panel.
The transportation info view panel has become much more detailed.
The transportation info view lists all the different lines in your city categorized by public and cargo transportation. It also includes information about how many passengers there has been, and it also includes information about the amount of cargo transported per type per month.
So once again, the comparisons to something like Transport Fever are going to be in place for this info panel and for all of the info panels with regards to public transport and cargo transport as well. That's not to say that the game is going to have the same depth as something like, again, Transport Fever or OpenTTD or anything like that. I will say it doesn't necessarily have that much of a focus on those things because this isn't Transport Fever or OpenTTD, but it is exciting that it's sort of heading in that direction. It's dipping its toes into the water and going, hey, this is an aspect of city building and city management that you are going to need to worry about and you should be worried about. Not in the sense of, oh my God, my city's going to fall apart, but in the sense of how does my city handle getting cargo from A to E? How does my city handle getting people from one location to another? It's a really nice amount of depth. It's a really nice bit of growth on top of what we know from Cities Skylines 1. And it just has me so excited to see, once again, as I've said a few times, what other people can do with this. I have ideas for what I can do with it, but what's really interesting is what other people do with it. What are people on the subreddit going to do with it? What are other YouTubers going to do with it? What are the streamers going to do with it? What are the fans going to do with it? What are the people that have played this game all day, every day for the last 9 years going to do with all of these complicated systems? Because there are going to be people out there that are so incredibly talented and just clever that are going to just master these systems so quickly. And I think in a year, 2 years time, there are going to be things that we do that are super common now in Cities Skylines 2 that we aren't thinking about right now, because there's tricks and tips from Cities Skylines 1 that are so basic to us now. They're like muscle memory that once upon a time they weren't. So that's what excites me about systems like this. And so that concludes everything for public and cargo transportation in Cities Skylines 2. That is everything from the feature highlights video. That is everything from the developer insights video. And if it's not obvious, I'm quite excited about all of it. I'm excited to see what I can do with it, what you can do with it, what we can all do with it. I'm excited to see what I haven't already seen, because there are going to be things that I'm sure I've missed that you've picked up or that we've all missed that we're not going to realize is a thing until we get our hands on Cities Skylines 2 and we really dive in and put in hundreds upon thousands of hours. It's refreshing, honestly. I was excited about this game before I started watching these dev diaries. I was obviously excited about it when I first heard about Cities Skylines 2 being a thing some years ago. And it's exciting to see it come to fruition, right? It's exciting to see what it's becoming. It's exciting to see what people think of it. And public and cargo transportation on top of that are it's just more icing on an already delicious cake, right? And here's the food comparisons again, but it's true. It is something that, as I've said, it's taking so much of what we know and it's making it more advanced. It's giving it more depth. And that's good. That's what I want from a sequel. I want more of the same, just better. That's what I really enjoyed. If we're going to compare to Transport Fever 2, that's what I really enjoyed about Transport Fever 2. It was a lot more of the same from Transport Fever 1. It was just bigger. It was just better. It just had more depth. And that's what I would hope for from a maybe one day Transport Fever 3. That's what we're getting from Cities Skylines 2. So with all that said and done, let me know what you're excited about down in the comments below. What in this video about public transport and cargo transport, what has you most excited from all of that? While you're down there, if you are new around here, I would appreciate it. I can't bring myself to do it. I can't have a YouTuber moment. I'm not doing it. I've already plugged Discord. It's fine. Thank you so much for watching. I can't do that with a straight face. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I appreciate you. I've forgot. I've completely thrown myself off now. Oh man, what's my outro? Yeah, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I've genuinely forgotten. That's enough. All right, I'll see you tomorrow. We're gonna do another one of these tomorrow. All right, bye.